Okay, so just got a haircut, so I'm pretty itchy, so if I'm scratching myself, that's why. But I want to talk really briefly, it's as brief as it's going to be, about medical school. First semester's done, pros and cons, things I should have done better, things I could have, things that I really like that I developed while in school. This is going to be kind of rambling, so I'm going to try to be a little bit more segmented, but it's going to be kind of all over the place, so just bear with me. I'm just going to kind of talk about my experience. I don't really have much of a plan to kind of like, oh, this happened and this. I just don't do videos like that. Okay, so I'll just kind of jump right into it. One of the things that I think I did well off the jump was waking up early, and I'm talking about 4:30 a.m. waking up early. And you know, people hit me with the whole like, oh, you know, that's just not for me, that's just not hot. Like, that's fine, you know what I mean? Like, it's gonna be one of those things where it's like, you need to wake up early, right? But to me, one of the great benefits of waking up early, because I have such terrible sleeping habits. Like, it's so bad, and it's not that I always choose to sleep badly. I really do struggle with like sleeping well. And what helped with waking up early is that, like, this kind of sounds messed up, but like, I would wake up at 4:30 in the morning, 5:30 in the morning, and I would study, right? I'd be up, I'd force myself to be up. I wouldn't take a nap, right? Classes at 8 in the morning. I have a 20-minute drive in, 10-minute walk to class. So, you know, I have about 30 minutes where I end up like wasting some time. And in the morning, I try not to get too distracted with cooking too much or like getting dressed. I try to do all that stuff the night before. But if I have to cook, then, you know, I'll make something really easy, right? But one of the benefits of waking up early, right, just to kind of get back to that point, is it gave me the day, how can I say it? It gave me the day shifted back a couple hours, right? So one rule that I really wanted to implement and stick to, and I didn't always, because there were just moments when I couldn't, because I had exams or I had quizzes or I had practicals, et cetera, or I had extracurriculars that just kind of interfered with me being able to do my schedule, is I did not want to study past noon. That was just my thing, right? And people were like, oh, you know, how do you do that? And it's kind of like, how do you do that? That doesn't make any sense. Like, you know, why do you restrict yourself? And all this kind of stuff, right? But like, the reason I wanted to personally was because I've been in school for like 7 years, right? I went through 4 years of undergrad, right? And I did a post-bac program. I didn't do a program, but I did post-bac classes, right? And then I did a master's program. There was 1 year, just 1 year, where I didn't take classes since I was 18. But even before I was 18, obviously I was in school. I was in elementary school, middle school, high school, college, post-bac, and then a year between those post-bac classes and then my master's program, and then medical school, like right after the master's program. So I have not really gotten to, in my life, take off time from school. And I understand what it's like, especially when you put in so much effort into something that you think is worth it, to, how can I say this? Put things aside that you should not be putting aside, because even if you can justify putting it aside, you're going to regret it later. And that comes with, and examples of that would be relationships. It would be habits that you built up. So like exercise, you're trying to learn to read more, you're trying to learn languages, or you're trying to learn a new skill like drawing, trying to walk more, like whatever it is. You're spending more time with family and friends. And as soon as you get into professional school, and even undergrad too, right? Obviously it happens in undergrad too. But what happens when you get into professional school, it becomes not only easy to justify sacrificing a lot of those things, and you have to some degree sacrifice some time with those things, but it becomes not only easy justifying the sacrifice of those things, but it makes sense to justify it. Like, you have a legitimate justification, in the sense that, and it's a wrong justification, I think, like in the end, but it's like, you have a legitimate justification in the sense that, like, you need to learn this information, and everybody around you wants you to learn this information, and it's really important because it's going to be pertinent to the way you practice whatever field you're in. So for me, it's going to be medicine. For other people, it's going to be dental school, engineers, whatever, right? Lawyers. So you're justified in the sense that, like, it's true. You should spend more time learning this information because it's going to be incredibly relevant to the way you practice medicine. Not everything in medical school is going to equally apply to the way you practice medicine, because there are just going to be some things you never see again, unless it's in a textbook, because you just don't work in Africa. You don't work in this part of the country. You don't work in Central America. You don't work in this field where you're going to see this more likely. Like, if you're going to be like a cardiologist, you're just not going to see a lot of, like, people aren't going to come to you for like skin issues, right? That just doesn't make sense. They might bring it up, you know, but that's just not your problem to some degree. It really just isn't, because you have no really authority to be making the diagnosis for those kind of things, because they should be seeing a dermatologist, right? That's just the way the field of medicine works, right? So it makes sense, right? So for me, waking up at 4:30, getting back to the point, waking up at 4:30, what it helped me to do was start my day, my studying time, my study day. It helped me start my study time at like 4:30, 5:30, something like that. And that meant that I had a good 5 to 6 hours of studying before it was noon. So that means I pretty much had a full day of studying, like it was like a full-time job, before it was even lunchtime, right? And if I needed to really study in the afternoon, because I said I did sometimes, then I would, right? But that would mean that I would go into the 7, 8, 9, possibly 10-hour study hours. Like it just got to the point where it's just like, why am I studying 10 hours a day? Like, it's not true that you need to, right? And if you do, it might be a thing that you need to like improve your study methods, because you should not be studying that much to get the same grade that other people are studying half the time for you to get. And if that's what it takes, then that's what it takes, right? But if that's not what's necessary, don't justify it, right? So that you don't actually make improvements. And again, it's easy to justify because you can say, well, this is just what works for me. It's like, dude, don't study 10 hours a day. That was just one of my rules. I don't want to study 10 hours a day. Again, not because I'm trying to be lazy, but because there are other things in my life, extracurriculars, research, relationships, you know, staying in shape, having friendships, you know, like I have a girlfriend, developing other habits. Like I do like learning other languages. I do like reading books. And there were just other things in my life that I wanted to keep up. If I had any free time in my life during medical school, I wanted to be able to keep that up, because it doesn't get easier as time goes on. You become more busy as time goes on. There are some years that are maybe a little bit easier to you than others, but it's just the case that like first year of medical school, from now until at the very least 7 years from now, you're going to be pretty busy, especially in residency, when you know you're working those 70 to 80 hour weeks. And I don't know, depends on like the specialty you get into, but it might be 90 to 100 hour weeks. So like trying to keep up the habits doesn't always seem realistic, and people are going to tell you that it's not realistic, and they're going to kind of guilt you, and it's not their fault because it makes sense. What they're saying is justified, that you need to sacrifice those things. But for me, one of the really helpful things about not sacrificing study time and not sacrificing the actual the personal things in my life that I want to keep up was waking up early. Waking up at 4:30 meant that I could get my day started earlier. I shifted my study time back like 3 or 4 hours, because people usually wake up like at 6:30 in the morning. They get ready, they go to school. They don't get to school by the time it's like, they don't get to school until it's like 7:15, 7:30. Class starts, and then you're in class, and maybe you start studying then, or maybe you actually sit there and you listen to the lectures, right? And that's kind of your study time. But it's like then you only get 4 hours. Whereas like if you were to wake up a couple hours earlier, you don't have to study then in the afternoon those hours. You still can, right? So it still gives you the option to study more, right? Because I just don't think people really get that much studying done in the evening and nighttime. Some people do, and people are like, I'm that guy, I'm the one that does it. Everybody says that about themselves, that chooses to study at night, but it's not always true. And you'll see that. You'll see people justifying those kind of habits that are not good for them, and you know it's not always helpful for them to continue down that path, because it's not even benefiting them. Like they're putting in all these hours, staying up until 2 or 3 in the morning, and they're getting the same grade that everybody else is getting, or even maybe worse sometimes better, right? But then you're establishing as like, oh, this works. Then you're establishing that as a pattern, right? And for me, it was really important, and I'm sorry I'm rambling, right? But it was really important for me to establish a study pattern that allowed me to actually devote the appropriate amount of time, and like that's very subjective, right? The appropriate amount of time for me towards the subject that I struggle with the most, but also have the opportunity to do what I wanted with the rest of my day with. And like in the afternoons, we had labs, we had we had different classes, right? So it wasn't always the case that like I just went off and did whatever I wanted in the afternoon, but I could take the afternoon and just kind of like breathe a little bit, right? The hardest part of my day is over. I got it done in the morning. As soon as my lab's over, I can choose to not study, and I don't need to feel anxious about that. It might not always be the most, again, prudent decision, because maybe I do need to study because I have a 4-hour exam coming up on Monday, right? But if I didn't have a huge exam coming up, I didn't have a practical coming up, it was one of those weeks where the exam was about 2 or 3 weeks in advance, you know, I took those afternoons and I'm like, okay, you know, maybe I go do something. Maybe I go volunteer. Maybe I go hang out with some friends. Maybe I call my mom. Maybe I don't know, whatever it is I wanted to do. You know, I just maybe tried to develop another habit, or just picked up some sort of thing that I gave up a couple weeks ago because I just got too busy. I even started my YouTube channel. I restarted the whole YouTube channel thing during one of those times where I was like, oh, you know, maybe I should like actually restart doing this thing again, because like I did enjoy doing it. It was one of my outlets, right? It was one of my creative outlets. Especially during undergrad, that I just gave up, and it never really went anywhere. But like I do want some sort of kind of like, you know, like recognition for like the work that I put into this channel. But it also helped me kind of just like relax. Like I didn't realize like how helpful it was for me to get my ideas out there, because, you know, it's not, people don't always just sit down and just let you kind of talk at them like this, right? I've been going on for 11 minutes, and even if like 2 or 3 people are listening and they've already clicked off the video, it's just, this has been helpful, right, for me to get this just off my mind. And the further I get into my medical career, I think the more I'm going to lean on creative outlets to just kind of have a place to just like, all right, you know, this is where I can like let loose a little bit, right? And sometimes I let loose a little bit more in my relationships. Sometimes I let loose a little bit more in working out, in, you know, learning different skills. Sometimes it's just like I need to like just kind of just, you know, pop off about whatever, you know, whatever's been going on. But yeah, that's one of the things that that's one of the biggest benefits that I had. One of the best habits that I tried to instill during this previous semester was waking up early. That was huge, right? Another thing that like I know other medical students talk about it on their channels, and I'll talk about it more in depth because there is a little bit more of a robust explanation, and I don't have like studies the way other people like, oh, this study shows you this. That's fine, you know, but like for me, it was really a personal choice to do this, but not taking notes. Like I don't take notes during medical school, and again, people kind of look at that and they're just like, that just doesn't work. That just doesn't work. And like for me, taking notes has never worked. Has never worked. For a lot of people, it always works. And those are the people that they just don't get it, you know, because it's like, how are you not writing anything down? You're not learning anything. You're not actually engaging with the information. It's not active learning, and it's not all these things, right? And again, I have like my justifications for like why I think that's just kind of like not the case. And like for me personally, it works. You know, like, do I recommend the way I study for other people? No, because then they're gonna not do well, right? And especially if you're in a school where you need to do well for this reason or that, don't switch up your study method too much if it's working for you. But if you're finding that it's just taking a lot of your time, like for me, the way I study without taking notes just saves me a lot of time. And like, even if I did still want to take like 5 hours to study, right, as much as like it would take for me to like take the notes and study the notes and like test myself and quiz myself and all these kind of things, those same 5 hours I could use to read over the material over and over and over and over again. And like, there's a reason for that madness. It's kind of like, and one of my professors talked about it. Like one time he said something that I thought perfectly encapsulated why I do what I do. He said, it's kind of like a song. I shouldn't mock him. He said, it's kind of like a song, right? You just continually sing that song. Like it's not that you're trying to study the song. You don't take notes on the song. You don't do flashcards on your favorite song. You just know your favorite song backwards and forwards, and you might even know some background information because you just love the song so much that you maybe actually put in some like, you know, oddly enough, like extra work into just trying to understand like why they wrote this song, like what was the reason, what does this song mean, what does this line mean, where are they getting this from, what are the instrumentals, like what is the music theory behind, like all that kind of stuff, right? And maybe you don't go that in depth into it, but you have a favorite song that you know the lyrics backwards and forwards. And like, why do you know the lyrics backwards and forwards? It's because you spent hours and hours and hours just singing that song. And that's what it is. That's what, to me, studying is like, right? It's not really about like how many notes do you write. It's not really about how many flashcards you do. It's not really about like all those things. To me, it's more about like how much exposure do I have to this information, and how familiar am I with it to the point where I can not only recite it, but it makes so much sense to me that like I could teach this subject in a more simplified way. Maybe it's not as accurate because obviously I don't have a PhD in this information and I'm getting this information from a PhD. So I like, there's a respect component there of just like, yeah, I could teach it, right? But like on the level of a tutor. But like that's helpful in that like I'm trying to communicate this to other students trying to understand the same information, right? And reading through the information over and over and over again, and you'd be surprised at how fast you can read through the information. Like let's say you have a PowerPoint that's like 60 slides, right? For biology or something like that, right? Biochemistry. You could probably read one slide every 30 seconds. Maybe there's some slides that would take you a minute. There are some slides that you're like, this slide is not important at all, or it's an introduction slide, or it's a reference slide, or it's a, oh, just for your information. It's not really gonna be tested, but I'm just letting you know. And like you realize that, oh, maybe there's not actually 60 slides, there's actually more like 50 slides, right? And on average, not every slide's gonna take you 30 seconds, but on average, you can read through the slide in 30 seconds, not taking any notes, not trying to force memorization, just reading it, just like you'd be reading a book or reading like a newspaper or something like that. And 30 seconds for 50 slides that are actually like information that you're actually going to be tested on, and they're really important slides, that is 25 minutes, right? 25 minutes. And that is a whole lecture. That's a whole lecture, right? And I'm saying 30 seconds, but it's probably more likely that you can read it in like 20 seconds, maybe 15 seconds, but I'll just say 30 seconds to be a little bit more conservative about it. And then you read it the second time. And what happens is you end up reading it faster. You become more efficient at it, right? Because you start to recognize, this is not important, this is important. And you also start to realize what I struggle with and what I don't struggle with as you read through it again a second time. You're like, the first time you read it, none of it made sense. It's like a foreign language. You've never heard this information before. It's all this kind of stuff. But the second time you read through it, you're like, okay, I've seen this already before, obviously, like a minute ago. So I'm just going to read through it again in the same way, not taking notes, no flashcards, nothing like that. And as I read through it, what you're gonna start to pick up on just naturally, it's gonna be a natural thing. For me, at least, it was a natural thing where like I started to recognize I really struggled trying to remember this information. Like this is such a like non-intuitive piece of information. And some of this information is pretty intuitive, right? Like, let's say you're studying this is what is this? Viruses. This is rabies, right? Let's say you're studying rabies. Like, how important is the slide to you personally, right? Where they're like, oh, you know, what are the symptoms for rabies? Foaming at the mouth, neurological symptoms. Like, there's some things, you know, like double vision, right? Takes how many months to manifest. And you're like, I've always kind of known that, right? Because, you know, I just grew up knowing about rabies. They talk about rabies. You see documentaries about rabies like all your life. Like, there are just some things that are just common knowledge to you because you've just grown up around that information for some reason, for one reason or another. And that could be biochemistry. Like, you went through like all of biochemistry, and like there's 3 or 4 slides on like the cell cycle, and you remember the cell cycle from high school because like it hasn't changed. It's the same, right? It gets a little bit more complex, but you know, for the most part, if you understand the general concepts of the cell cycle, like you got it, right? You pretty much got it, right? So how much time do I need to spend on like things that I've already pretty much learned in my past, and stuff that's intuitive? Not that much, right? So you kind of like read through those pretty quickly. You're like, okay, I actually don't need to know, because if they were to ask me a question on this, I know this stuff. Like, I already know these things. I don't need to like make flashcards on things that I already know. So you don't, right? So then that leaves you with about like, let's say about like 40 slides that are like, you don't really know this information. And that's still quite a bit, right? But now you're starting to read them a little bit faster because you just recognize things faster. And even within slides that are non-intuitive to you, there are still some lines in there where you're just like, I already know some of this stuff, right? Some of this stuff makes a lot of sense. And even if it's like more difficult for you to understand, you read it and you're just like, oh, I got that. You're like, I maybe I have to read this 1 or 2 more times before I like really get it, but I could explain this concept right now and it makes so much sense to me. And you start to recognize, you know, the more you read it, that you read through those slides, the PowerPoint a second time, you read through it in about 20 minutes. And then you're like, okay, right? So now you're about 45 minutes in, you've read through the PowerPoint twice, right? The lecture was about an hour long, right? And then you read through it again a third time. And guess what? You read through it a little bit faster. maybe you don't read through it faster, like you speed read through it, but you're just like, I'm not even looking at these slides. I'm not even looking at this information. I'm going to highlight this information, or I'm just going to look at, just like focus on these things. Like, this is what I need to look at. This is what I'm not understanding. And I'm going to focus on these things. And you do that. And you realize it takes you about 15 minutes to get through that. Third time you read through the PowerPoint, right? And that took you about 15 minutes. So now you're about an hour in, right? Which is how long the lecture took. So you're about an hour in. You're about an hour into studying. You've read through this PowerPoint 3 times, and then you leave it alone. Maybe you leave it alone for a couple days. Maybe you leave it alone until tomorrow. Maybe you come back to it in about an hour or 2, right? But you can now then move on to something else that's like easier, more difficult, whatever you want to do with it. And for me, that was always kind of helpful, is to not have to be bogged down by taking notes. Because for me, like, what the problem with notes for me was that it slowed me down so much, because I don't know who takes notes fast, right? But like, it slowed me down so much that the time I spent taking notes could have been time I used to read through the PowerPoint, read through it again, and read through it again, and read through it again, because you cannot take your notes into the exam. That's just true. Like, unless it's open note, which is cool, right? But for the most part, if you're gonna be taking exams, especially in medical school, it's not, and obviously on the boards, it's not, you can't take your notes into it, right? And your notes aren't meant to be used as cheat sheets, but if you can make your notes in your head, which is like something that like you kind of learn to do in every other setting other than school, like working a job or something like that, like you just have like a shorthand in your head just naturally, and you might get to the point where you don't even realize it's there anymore. Then you don't have to worry about taking notes on a piece of paper. And that was always my thing, right? It was just like, I couldn't stand taking notes. It just took too long. And for me, I just continually reinforced it through reading and reading and reading and reading. And people say that's a passive way of learning, that doesn't work, and all these kind of things. But I'm just like, I don't know if that's true. Like, it is obviously passive, but to me, I disagree that it doesn't help you learn. And is there more efficient ways of learning? I'm totally open to that. And like, I've explored note taking, I've explored Anki, I've explored like different kind of things. You know, people like videos a lot, and that's fine, right? But for me, just like reading through the PowerPoints and just like looking at what the professor's asking me, and just trying to figure out what the professor's going to ask me was super helpful. And trying to figure out how I should study more for the exam, and what I should focus on, because then I understood my weaknesses and I understood my strengths, and I could like tailor the way I read things to that, rather than just like assuming I didn't know a lot of it and then taking notes on it or taking flashcards on it. And you know, people are going to defend their notes. They're like, you're taking notes wrong, and obviously I'm taking notes wrong. That's why I don't like it, because I've never figured out how to take notes correctly. And if I have, and I've done those people's methods, it was just so steep of a learning curve that it would like set me back. It would take like a while to learn that method, and like I would actually have to want to learn it and like implement it and be excited about it, to the point where like it doesn't make studying like a chore, right? Because for me, just reading something is not that big of a deal. Like, I can read through a PowerPoint, and it's not a lot of like energy. Like, I could do it all day long. So it never bothered me to do that. So that's why I've implemented that method. And this video has been going on for long enough. It's been going on for long enough. I'm gonna post this, and I think I'm gonna post another video, kind of continuing the recap of this medical school thing. Again, done with the first semester. I do want to talk a little bit more about the study stuff that I'm talking about, because I know people are gonna be, defending their own way of doing it, and that's fair. But I think there is a method to the madness, and it's, not perfect, but to me, I think it's worth exploring more, especially for people that aren't sure that they are actually doing as well as they would like, as they know they're capable of doing. And the thing that might be holding them back is the fact that they take notes, the fact that they study the way everybody else tells them to study. But it actually is pretty inefficient, in my opinion. I think, in my opinion, it obviously is. Where'd it go? But yeah, I'll talk to you guys later.